Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Manoj Singh Rana, and with me is Abhineet Shukla, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi participates in Quad leaders' virtual meeting, focus on developments in Indo-Pacific. Civil Aviation Ministry says nearly 7,000 Indians have returned from Ukraine. Global crude oil prices hit 9-year high of $115 per barrel amid Russia-Ukraine crisis. Second round of talks between Russia and Ukraine underway in Belarusian territory. 117th meeting of India and Pakistan Permanent Indus Commission takes place in Islamabad. Reaffirms their commitment to resolving issues through bilateral discussions. And second humanitarian assistance carrying 2,000 metric tons of wheat leaves Atari border for Afghanistan today. With the new Omicron variant of coronavirus causing concern, we appeal to our listeners to be vigilant and get fully vaccinated, and also help others, including children between 15 and 18 years, to get vaccinated. Please continue to follow these 3 simple steps to stay safe. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing, and focus on hand and face hygiene. For any COVID-related information and guidance, contact the national helpline numbers 011-2397-8046 and 1075. And now the news in detail. The Quad leaders' virtual meeting is underway. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is attending the meeting along with US President Joe Biden, Prime Minister of Australia Scott Morrison and Prime Minister of Japan Fumio Kishida. The leaders will have an opportunity to continue their dialogue after the September 2021 summit in Washington, D.C. They will also exchange views and assessments about important developments in the Indo-Pacific. The Quad leaders will also review ongoing efforts to implement the leaders' initiatives announced as part of the Quad's contemporary and positive agenda. Prime Minister Narendra Modi interacted with students who have returned from the conflict-hit Ukraine in his parliamentary constituency, Varanasi, today. Students shared their experiences with the Prime Minister. The students were from Varanasi as well as other parts of Uttar Pradesh. The Prime Minister assured the students that the government is committed to the safety of every Indian stranded in Ukraine. He said all efforts are on to bring back all the students safely.
Global crude oil prices today hit a 9-year high of $115 per barrel mark in intraday trade amid worries over supply constraints due to Russian military operation in Ukraine. Brent crude oil rose more than 5% in intraday trade towards $120 per barrel level and is now up nearly 20% on the weekly basis. Investors showed concern over costlier crude prices, which could push inflation even higher worldwide. Inflation rates have already hit multi-year high levels in many countries. Financial experts said investors are still looking for cues as even on 8th day of the Russian military operation, there is no sign of settlement. Russia launched its military operation in Ukraine on 24th of February, which is still ongoing. Other commodities like coal, natural gas and aluminium are also surging as Western nations tighten sanctions on Russia. According to a leading Indian public bank report, the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine may impact certain high-frequency indicators like financial markets and exchange rates. However, it is stated that this will not have any lasting impact on the Indian economy. Nearly 18,000 Indians have left Ukraine since advisories issued by External Affairs Ministry. Briefing media in New Delhi this evening, Ministry spokesperson Arindam Bagchi said the pace of Operation Ganga continues to accelerate.
During the last 24 hours, 15 flights landed in India, bringing back more than 3,000 Indians. With this, it takes the total number of flights under Operation Ganga to 30, if I remember correctly. And I think that so we have brought back around 6,400 Indian citizens. During the next 24 hours, 18 flights have been scheduled. Of these, 3 would be Indian Air Force C-17 flights, and the other flights are commercial: Air India, Indigo, SpiceJet, and Go First or Go Air. In terms of the departure points from Europe, there will be 7 flights from Bucharest, 5 from Budapest, 3 from Rzeszów in Poland, and 1 from Kosice in Slovak Republic. In addition, a new location has been identified near the Romanian border in the city of Suceava, from where 2 flights will be operated during the next 24 hours.
Mr. Bagchi said the increased number of flights reflects the large number of Indians who have crossed over from Ukraine and are now in the neighboring countries. He said efforts will be further stepped up to bring back all the Indians at the earliest. Indian embassies, in cooperation with the host governments and local partners, are providing food and accommodation to them. He appreciated the Ukrainian government for facilitating the evacuation of Indian nationals despite their own challenges. On developments on the ground in Ukraine, Mr. Bagchi said India is closely following developments in Kharkiv and Sumy and other cities in eastern Ukraine.
The Civil Aviation Ministry today said nearly 7,000 Indians have returned from Ukraine through special civilian flights as well as Indian Air Force flights. Over 6,200 people were brought back by civilian airlines, which includes 2,185 persons coming today through 10 special civilian flights. Today's flights included 5 from Bucharest, 2 from Budapest, 1 from Kosice, and 2 from Rzeszów by civilian airlines. In addition, 3 Indian Air Force IAF flights are bringing more Indians today. 4 IAF flights brought back 798 Indian nationals between the midnight of the 2nd of March and the early morning of the 3rd of March. The number of civilian flights is to be scaled up further, and more than 7,400 persons are expected to be brought through special flights in the next 2 days. Around 3,500 persons are expected to be brought back tomorrow and over 3,900 on the 5th of March. The Defence Ministry has issued an advisory for Indian nationals in Ukraine's Kharkiv and asked them to remain mentally strong and compile and share information with fellow Indians. It asked Indian nationals to organize in small groups and squads of 10 Indian students and within that organize buddy or pair system. Their presence and whereabouts must always be known to their buddy or small group coordinator. The advisory asked Indian students to keep up a small kit of essential items on persons or at hand round the clock and keep a white flag or white cloth for waving. They must avoid stepping out from their bunkers, basements or shelter at all times. They should not go to downtown or crowded areas and join local protesters or militia. They must refrain from commenting on social media and not take pictures or selfies with military vehicles, troops, soldiers, checkposts and militia. The Defence Ministry has asked people to not try and film live combat situations or light fires in enclosed spaces. The Defence Ministry said in its advisory that potentially dangerous or difficult situations to be expected include aerial raids, attacks by aircraft, missile attacks, artillery shelling and gunfire.
The second round of talks between Russia and Ukraine are underway in Belarusian territory. The Russian Foreign Ministry said it hoped the talks would restore peace in Donbass and enable all people in Ukraine to return to peaceful life. The first round of talks held in the border town of Gamel in Belarus on Monday lasted for 5 hours and ended without a breakthrough. In today's Hotspots section, we bring you a discussion on war zone safety protocols and their importance. We are joined by Lieutenant General S.A. Hasnain of former GOC 15 Army Corps.
Joining us today on perspective on what to do in conflict zone or war zones and how to protect themselves, we are joined by Lieutenant General S.A. Hasnain of the former GOC 15 Army Corps. Sir, what would you suggest civilians do if they are caught in a conflict zone?
That's a very important question with the kind of activities which are going on in Kharkiv now. We are told that Kiev is evacuated completely as far as Indian students are concerned, but Kharkiv and maybe there may be other centers which are potentially still under threat. Now, one of the first things that a student in a war zone or any civilian in a war zone should do is to use a common sense approach. And a common sense approach primarily alludes to the fact that don't be alone, be in groups. Soldiers always operate in groups. Get strength in groups. If you don't have big groups, at least a buddy pair, 2 people together. And make sure that any activity that you do, your buddy also accompanies you. two people must go everywhere together so that no one is isolated and no one is lost. Avoid going anywhere near government buildings, military buildings or institutions of the military, because these are prime targets of the adversaries always, of the people who are fighting on the ground. Missile attacks, air attacks, rocket attacks will all take place primarily on these buildings. The next point which you must do is to conserve your logistics. Now, it's not a normal situation, so don't start having your meals as if you are having them on an everyday basis. That is absolutely necessary to make sure that conserve your food. There will be a shortage of food. There will be a shortage of bottled water. Wherever you can keep your bottle, so you keep it. If you've got empty bottles, fill them up with whatever drinkable water you get. Because there may be times when for 48 hours you may not be able to step out to even get a mouthful of water. This is a very important aspect as far as logistics is concerned. Keep a knapsack. I'm sure all of you have got, all of them have got their rucksacks with them. Even now, if there are some stores potentially possibly open here and there, try and make sure you get batteries. Get your basic toiletries, get a torch, get a small knife, a spoon, a steel bowl, or something which will help you to take food, get food from anywhere else, conserve a little amount of food with you. This is again very, very important. And one very, very important aspect, keep your mobile charged. If there is power there, there will be a power source somewhere or the other. I can see that so far power has not come down completely. Please, at the first instance, make sure you charge your mobile and keep a spare battery. If you've got a spare battery, ensure that that also remains charged. So this is your outlook to the world. At the end of the day, you have to inform people where you are. And this is the way to remain in connectivity. Keep your social media contacts all the time apprised of where you are, under what conditions you are. I know that the Indian embassy from Kiev has moved westwards, but wherever they are, if you can be in touch with the Indian embassy and reveal them your location, it will always be a good thing to coordinate subsequent missions which may take place even as the war is continuing to be fought. So these are some of the issues. I would also strongly advocate that if you're staying in a group, make a small placard saying India. India is one of the respected nations in this whole unfortunate set of circumstances. We are neutral. Both sides respect our neutrality, and therefore, if once you can display and prove that you are from India, you will be helped by whichever side is hitting anywhere in the area around you.
Right, sir, some very crucial suggestions made by you, General Hasnain. What kind of food one can stock up on, and should it be high-calorie food? Should one rely on dry food, which can last longer?
Mostly it should be dry food, something which can be, you don't need to cook at all. It should be instant, ready to eat. The military is, remember, on emergency rations, or Indian emergency rations always involve shakar paras, but obviously you don't have shakar paras there. So chocolates are high energy. You will get protein bars, energy bars, the other kind of things. Even one energy bar is good enough to make you last for about 10 to 12 hours. You don't need anything more as a filler. That water is the critical, because there's a tendency to get thirsty. When you're not eating, you're going to get thirsty, and you will tend to consume more than the required water.
Right, sir. You also said that it is important to ensure that you have the batteries and to have your phones charged. For that, one requires a power source. Are the shelters or the bunkers that are there because the residential areas are also been shelled, equipped with power source or ways in which phones, etc., can be charged?
This is going to be a major challenge. I fully admit that these residential buildings are being targeted. I would always advise that most of our people who are there should try and get into car parks, underground car parks. Underground car parks always also have some kind of electric charging facilities here and there. Make use of them. Concentrate around the areas where there are power points, plug points. Because this is a very crucial thing, the aspect of communication. Otherwise, no one is going to know where exactly you are. Car parks also have very large entrances and exits. So when destruction takes place, you may find that a portion of the exit is still available to you. Otherwise, if you go into a building in which there are very narrow exits and entrances, the whole thing collapses and you can't find a way out immediately. Therefore, always look for places such as underground car parks.
Yes, and very often we look at Twitter feed wherein we note that authorities are asking civilians to go to shelters after an air raid siren has been sounded. What is an air raid siren? When is it sounded? And what should civilians do when it is sounded?
There are 2-3 things as far as air raids and shelling is concerned. Usually there is a pattern to shelling. you will find that after having spent 24 hours underground somewhere and you heard the sounds, you can generally make out, okay, now this is the time at which shedding normally takes. And sure, 2 hours around that period, you don't step out of your shelter. This is exactly probably what happened to a very, very unfortunate incident which happened with one of our young friends, which happened in Kharkiv. So stepping out like this without warning, if you have established a pattern, please follow that pattern. The second thing is that there will be no warnings. The air raid sirens will go based upon the surveillance which is going on by the military. You will hear these sirens. The moment sirens go off, you know that in 10 minutes' time, approximately usually about 10 minutes' time, some kind of an air attack is going to appear over the area in which you are holed up, wherever you are hiding at that time. Need to go make sure that you go underground. If you are overground somewhere hiding for that moment, go underground. I fully agree you can't remain underground all the time, so it's important to study the pattern. How often do the air raids take place and what frequency are they take after 6 hours, after 8 hours? From this pattern, you will be able to establish for yourself and be able to make use of the interval.
Sir, should civilians go to congested areas in this point in time? Because you said they do not travel individually, only travel in groups. But certain areas will be congested. For instance, certain border crossings will be congested. So what should be the strategy for certain areas?
You see, to minimize the dangers of getting separated, being isolated alone without the kind of support that you need at this particular time, it's important to remain in groups, and that's why I advise that is at least remain in a buddy pair. A buddy pair is the most effective thing. Armies around the world follow the system of buddies. Two people together at all particular times. I would not advise people to go near crowded areas at all. Of course, there will be some stores open, there will be limited amount of logistics available. So there will be a gravitation of people around these stores. Avoid that as far as possible. Send out 2, 3 or 4 people, go and buy those logistics if necessary, but should not be thinking of having 15, 20 people crowding into a store and hoping to be able to get the maximum.
And sir, what sort of coordination is a civilian in a conflicted zone is expected to do? Is the civilian expected to constantly monitor various updates being sent out by the Government of India, the Ministry of External Affairs, or by the Indian Embassy?
That is absolutely mandatory. And one of the methods of doing it also to conserve battery power, to conserve your mobile power, you should nominate people who will be responsible for these messaging, monitoring, receiving messages, sending messages, etc. for a period of time. Otherwise, you will find in a group of 15 people, all 15 people are involved in trying to to access here and there, and you're all going to run out of battery power. So it's best to conserve your battery power. Let one or two make this access. Always remain in touch. Perhaps you can open a WhatsApp group immediately, and the person you contact with them, you can open a WhatsApp group, have some kind of a methodology, have a frequency of contacting each other. I foresee that as time goes along and there is a greater amount of attrition on these cities, this communication may not last. Because after all, everything depends on towers. Where towers are, it also depends on internet, underground internet, overground internet. These are the kind of facilities and infrastructure which will start dying out slowly. So it's important that right at the beginning you make the contacts now. And subsequently, if you have to move and get to some other city or you're taken to some other city, at least try and make an access there immediately to the infrastructure.
And for instance, if there's a group of students that is looking at an evacuation, does it help to have one coordinator in that group to coordinate with various authorities and communicating with the rest of them, as opposed to each person trying to coordinate with the authorities?
That's exactly what I was meaning when I gave out my earlier advice. Leadership in a combat zone of this nature is very important. One among 15, 20, 30 people invariably emerges as a leader. That's a natural situation with all. And the moment you have 25, 30 human beings, one or two will emerge as leaders. Let them emerge as leaders. Give them the official kind of charge to be leaders. Because 25, 30 people trying to do everything themselves is the worst kind of way of management. So leader is important, 1 to 2 people, and probably a number 2, deputy, also appointed simultaneously. It's also important to maintain a small little structure of the leadership. You can have someone looking after all aspects of communication, someone looking after all aspects of logistics, someone looking after all aspects of surveillance, which means essentially going around and checking and making sure that everyone is safe and that there are no threats which are emerging.
Thank you, General Hasnain. Very important points made by you on what civilians should do in combat zones or war zones. Thank you very much.
This is All India Radio giving you the world news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
Welcome back to the world news. Russian forces have seized control of a key port city in southern Ukraine. Kherson is the first major city to be taken by Russia after heavy fighting since it invaded a week ago. Its mayor Igor Kolikhaev said Russian troops had forced their way into the city council building and imposed a curfew on residents. Several cities have come under intense shelling, with Wednesday as one of the most destructive days of the fighting. In a Facebook post, Mr. Kolikhaev said Russian forces were in control of Kherson, a port on Ukraine's southern Black Sea coast with a population of more than 280,000 people. He urged Russian soldiers not to shoot at civilians, saying there are no Ukrainian forces in the city. Mr. Kolikhaev called on residents to follow conditions set by Russian forces in order to keep the Ukrainian flag flying. Beijing-based Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, has announced that all activities relating to Russia and Belarus are on hold and under review due to the ongoing war in Ukraine. Russia is a founding member of the AIIB. Neither Ukraine nor Belarus are its members. China is the largest shareholder and India is the second largest shareholder in the Multilateral Development Bank. The AIIB in a statement on its website said that the AIIB stands ready to extend financing flexibly and quickly and support members who have been adversely impacted by the war, directly or indirectly.
The International Paralympic Committee, IPC, on Thursday banned athletes from Russia and Belarus from competing in the 2022 Beijing Winter Paralympics, which opens on Friday, the 4th of March, following an international backlash against its earlier decision to let them compete under neutral affiliations. Multiple countries, teams and athletes threatened not to compete, jeopardizing the viability of the Beijing 2022 Paralympic Winter Games. At a press conference in Beijing on Thursday, IPC reversed its earlier decision of Wednesday, which came under criticism and threat of boycott just a day ahead of the Games' opening ceremony on Friday, amid Russia's invasion of Ukraine and Belarus' support for it. The 117th meeting of the Permanent Indus Commission, comprising of Indus Commissioners of India and Pakistan, was held from the 1st of March till today in Pakistan's Islamabad. External Affairs Ministry said in a release that during the meeting, technical discussions were held regarding ongoing projects, including Pakaldul, Kiru and Lower Kalnai. The Indian side underscored that all its projects are fully compliant with the provisions of the treaty and provided technical details in support of its position. The Indian delegation was led by P.K. Saxena, the Indian Commissioner for Indus Waters. Under the provisions of the Indus Waters Treaty signed between India and Pakistan in 1960, the two commissioners are required to meet at least once every year, alternately in India and Pakistan.
The second convoy of India's humanitarian assistance carrying 2,000 metric tons of wheat left Atari in Amritsar today for Afghanistan's Jalalabad. External Affairs Ministry spokesperson Arindam Bagchi said this is part of India's commitment of 50,000 metric tons of wheat for the Afghan people and will be distributed by the World Food Programme in Afghanistan. He said India remains committed to its special friendship with the people of Afghanistan. Western Australia has reopened its borders nearly 2 years after first sealing them to international visitors and other Australians because of the coronavirus pandemic. The Australian state is the last to drop its travel entry ban 4 months after the nation's biggest city, Sydney, welcomed back international travel. Western Australia insisted its policy was needed to stop the virus spreading, but critics attacked it for separating families in the same country. The state was dubbed a hermit kingdom for the hardline policy. Its premier, Mark McGowan, was compared to North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un by the boss of Australian airline Qantas last month. Alan Joyce later apologized for his remarks. Authorities said they expected more than 8,000 arrivals on the first day of the state's reopening. And now let's take a look at the news from the business world.
The Sensex lost 366 points to finish at 55,103. The Nifty also tumbled 108 points or 0.65% to settle at 16,498. Amongst the global markets, Asian stocks gained as the US Fed Chair Jerome Powell hinted at a 25 basis points increase in this month's policy review against the market expectation of a 50 basis points hike. The Fed also gave a dovish commentary against the backdrop of the Ukraine crisis. South Korea's Kospi surged 1.6% and Japan's Nikkei 225 climbed 0.7%. Singapore's Straits Times ended 0.3% up and Hong Kong's Hang Seng added 0.4%. China's Shanghai Composite Index slipped 0.1%. European share markets were down in intraday trade. Also in intraday trade, Brent crude prices were up nearly 3.5% to trade around $117 per barrel. Back home, gold prices climbed 560 rupees at the multi-commodity exchange for April contracts. The precious metal was trading at 51,850 rupees per 10 gram. Silver prices surged 400 rupees to trade at 67,360 rupees per kilogram for March contracts when reports last came in. And the rupee weakened 20 paise against the US dollar. The local unit settled at 75 rupees and 91 paise against the American currency. Gaurav Dhawanlal for World News, All India Radio.
ICC Women's World Cup 2022 is set to begin tomorrow. The tournament will witness 8 teams battling against each other for the title. The 8 teams which are part of ICC Women's World Cup 2022 are those of India, Pakistan, Australia, Bangladesh, New Zealand, South Africa, England and West Indies. In tennis, India will lock horns with Denmark in the World Group Playoff first tie tomorrow at Delhi Gymkhana Club. In the first singles match, India's Ramkumar Ramanathan will face Denmark's Christian Sigsgaard. In another match, Yuki Bhambri to take on Mikael Torpegard.
News just in, Prime Minister Narendra Modi participated today at a virtual summit of Quad leaders, along with US President Joe Biden, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. Developments in Ukraine were discussed in the meeting, including its humanitarian implications. The Prime Minister emphasized the need to return to a path of dialogue and diplomacy. The Prime Minister underlined that the Quad must remain focused on its core objective of promoting peace, stability and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. He called for concrete and practical forms of cooperation within the Quad in areas like humanitarian and disaster relief, debt sustainability, supply chains, clean energy, connectivity and capacity building. The Prime Minister reiterated the importance of adhering to the UN Charter, the international law and respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. Reuters says China will not join in sanctions on Russia that have been led by the West. Financial Times headlines, Chinese people stranded in Kiev become target of Ukrainian anger. The Guardian writes, Macron tells Putin he is making major mistake in Ukraine. Bangladesh abstained from voting in the UN on a resolution adopted by the UN General Assembly UNGA on Russia invading Ukraine, reports Dhaka Tribune. Gulf News also writes Russia intensifies bombardment of Ukraine urban areas, 9 dead after Russian forces strike Chernihiv. The New York Times says 1 million flee Ukraine as Russia bombards key cities. Russia takes Kherson government building in siege on Ukraine's port cities, highlights Washington Post.
Youth Indian boxer Anand Yadav today produced a dominating show to progress into the quarterfinals at the 2022 ASBC Asian Youth and Junior Boxing Championships in Amman, Jordan. Anand outclassed Kazakhstan's Aslan Aslanov in the 54 kg youth men's preliminary round match by unanimous decision. A quick look at the headlines once again. Prime Minister Narendra Modi participates in Quad leaders' virtual meeting focused on developments in the Indo-Pacific. Civil Aviation Ministry says nearly 7,000 Indians have returned from Ukraine. Global crude oil prices hit 9-year high of $115 per barrel amid Russia-Ukraine crisis. Second round of talks between Russia and Ukraine underway in Belarusian territory. 117th meeting of India and Pakistan Permanent Indus Commission takes place in Islamabad, reaffirms their commitment to resolving issues through bilateral discussions. And second humanitarian assistance carrying 2,000 metric tons of wheat leaves Atari border for Afghanistan today. And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.